What if I told you that the mighty Roman Empire, the superpower that conquered half the known world, built roads stretching thousands of miles, and left behind monuments that still stand today, ended not with a bang, not with a battle that shook the earth, but with a teenager quietly handing over a crown? No burning city, no bloody massacre. Just a boy emperor, barely old enough to shave, being told it was over. Who was he? And what happened to him after the empire crumbled beneath his feet? When we talk about the fall of Rome, most people imagine a cataclysm. The Colosseum in flames, barbarian warriors storming through the city, emperors cut down in their palaces. But the truth is far stranger. The end of the Western Roman Empire came in the year 476 CE, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. Yet the story isn't one of spectacular destruction. Instead, it's almost anticlimactic, almost quiet, and that is what makes it fascinating. In this video, we're going to explore that mystery. Who was Romulus Augustulus, the so-called last Roman emperor? How did his reign collapse so quickly? What happened to him after he was deposed? And why does his name, Romulus Augustus, combining the founder of Rome and the first emperor, carry so much eerie symbolism? By the end, you'll see how the fall of the Western Roman Empire wasn't the sudden death of a civilization, but more like the fading away of a candle, with Romulus Augustulus as the boy who held the flame. When we speak of the last Roman emperor of the West, we are not referring to a seasoned statesman or a battle-hardened general, but instead to a boy. Romulus Augustulus, a teenager when he assumed the throne, was placed there not by the acclaim of the Senate, nor by the loyalty of Rome's legions, but by the ambition of his father, Orestes. Orestes had once served as a secretary to Attila the Hun, surviving the whirlwind of barbarian politics before returning to Italy and maneuvering his way into power. By 475 CE, Orestes had managed to elevate himself to the role of commander-in-chief of the Roman army in Italy, but lacking the lineage or legitimacy to seize the throne outright. He crowned his son emperor, creating what was clearly a puppet regime. The boy was given the name Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus. It was not his official imperial title, but rather a diminutive nickname, almost mocking in its tone. To many contemporaries, Romulus Augustulus was never regarded as the true ruler of the West. In fact, the Eastern Roman Emperor Zeno in Constantinople recognized Julius Nepos as the legitimate emperor of the West, not this youth enthroned by his father's ambition. Thus, Romulus was a figurehead, a symbol of the empire's fragility and the hollow nature of its authority by the mid-5th century. Still, his reign represented more than just the political schemes of his father. It stood as the last flickering candle of what had once been the mightiest empire the world had ever known. His court, centered in Ravenna, the empire's capital since Honorius had abandoned Rome itself in the early 5th century, was a shadow of the grandeur of old. Rome's legions were largely made up of foederati, barbarian mercenaries who were loyal only as long as they were paid. Its finances were drained, its aristocracy fractured, and its populace tired after centuries of invasions, sacks, and political instability. Romulus, though a child, carried a heavy burden of symbolism. He was crowned with an empire already lost in substance, surviving only in name and memory. The men who surrounded him must have known that he was a mere placeholder in history. Yet, the irony of his reign, the last emperor of the West bearing the names Romulus, the mythical founder of Rome, and Augustus, the first great emperor, was not lost even on contemporaries. The boy who began his reign in 475 CE would hold the title for barely a year before the end arrived in the form of Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain who would become king of Italy. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE is often called the Fall of Rome, though at the time, many likely saw it less as a cataclysm and more as a changing of masters. The Western Roman Empire had been in a state of collapse for generations, losing provinces to invaders one after another. Britain had been abandoned in the early 5th century. Gaul was under Frankish and Visigothic control. Spain was lost to the Suebi and Visigoths, and Africa, the granary of the empire, had been seized by the Vandals. Italy remained the core of what was once the Western Empire, but even there, Roman authority was threadbare. Enter Odoacer, a Germanic warrior of uncertain tribal background, often described as a leader of the Heruli, but in reality commanding a mixed band of foederati. These were men who had once served Rome, but now demanded land in Italy as payment for their loyalty. Orestes, Romulus' father, refused their demands, unwilling to divide Italy among these barbarian soldiers. In response, they revolted, and Odoacer emerged as their chosen leader. In 476, he marched on Ravenna, the imperial capital, and swiftly defeated Orestes, who was captured and executed. Romulus, however, was spared. Here lies one of history's remarkable moments of mercy. Odoacer, perhaps recognizing the boy's youth and helplessness, chose not to kill him. Instead, Romulus was stripped of his imperial insignia and sent into a quiet exile in Campania. In a symbolic gesture, Odoacer sent the imperial regalia, the diadem and purple cloak, eastward to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, acknowledging that there would be no more emperors in the West. With this act, the fiction of a Western Roman Empire officially ended. Odoacer did not proclaim himself emperor. Instead, he took the title of Rex Italiae, King of Italy. His authority was recognized, at least in principle, by the Eastern Emperor, and he ruled Italy for over a decade. Many Romans must have seen this transition as less dramatic than later historians would make it. The Senate continued to function, aristocrats continued to hold their estates, and life in Italy did not immediately change overnight. Yet the symbolic power of the event, the deposition of the last emperor of Rome by a barbarian general, echoed through the centuries as the moment the Roman world, as it had been known, ceased to exist. What became of Romulus Augustulus after his deposition is one of history's enduring mysteries. Unlike so many deposed rulers throughout history who met their deaths on the battlefield or by execution, Romulus lived on, quietly fading from the stage of world affairs. Sources suggest that Odoacer, rather than treating him harshly, allowed the young ex-emperor to live in comfort. He was granted a pension and sent to live in the Campania region of southern Italy, likely near Naples. This was a fertile and wealthy part of Italy, home to aristocratic villas and coastal estates that had long been havens of retreat for Rome's elite. The historian Jordanes, writing in the 6th century, records that Romulus lived out his life in obscurity, cared for and spared from political machinations. His existence in Campania may have been one of seclusion, but not deprivation. In fact, one account mentions a villa named Lucullinum near Naples, a grand estate that had once belonged to the Roman general Lucullus, famed for his luxurious lifestyle. If Romulus indeed resided there, it would have been a fittingly ironic retreat for a boy once styled as emperor, now reduced to the quiet life of a landed aristocrat. The pension provided to him by Odoacer is also a detail worth emphasizing. This act underscores the fact that Romulus posed no threat to the new regime. He was not a rival claimant, nor did he inspire loyalty among the remaining Roman elite. Stripped of the imperial purple, he was simply a forgotten figure, a reminder of an office that no longer existed in the West. Unlike Julius Nepos, who continued to claim the title of Western Emperor from his base in Dalmatia until his assassination in 480, Romulus had no further role to play in the theater of imperial politics. The ultimate fate of Romulus Augustulus is uncertain. Some sources suggest he lived until at least the 480s, while others claim he survived even longer, though by then he would have been irrelevant to the events shaping Italy. and the Mediterranean world. His quiet survival stands in stark contrast to the violent deaths of so many emperors before him. Instead of dying in a palace coup, poisoned, or butchered by soldiers, Romulus slipped into the anonymity of history, his name remembered more for its symbolism than for any deeds of his own. The story of Romulus Augustulus is steeped in symbolism, much of it arising from his very name. To carry the name Romulus was to evoke the memory of Rome's legendary founder, the twin who, according to myth, slew his brother Remus and established the city on the banks of the Tiber in 753 BCE. To bear the name Augustus was to recall the first emperor of Rome, Octavian, who ushered in the Principate in 27 BCE and ruled over an age of prosperity and expansion. Thus, the boy, emperor who reigned in the dying days of the Western Empire bore, in miniature form, the names of Rome's mythical beginning and its imperial zenith. This coincidence struck ancient observers as deeply meaningful. The empire had come full circle, from Romulus to Romulus, from Augustus to Augustulus. The child emperor represented both the beginning and the end, a bookend to centuries of Roman dominance. His nickname, Augustulus, meaning little Augustus, diminished the grandeur of his title, a reminder that the majesty of Augustus had been reduced to this frail remnant, a puppet child who presided over nothing more than a hollow shell of empire. It is telling that Romulus was never recognized as a legitimate emperor by the Eastern court in Constantinople. Zeno, the Eastern emperor, continued to regard Julius Nepos in Dalmatia as the rightful Western ruler. Thus, Romulus' reign was doubly symbolic, not only the last gasp of imperial authority in the West, but also a reign stripped of recognition. He existed as emperor only in Italy, never in the eyes of the larger Roman world. The weight of this symbolism has shaped how history remembers him. Romulus Augustulus himself did little to alter events. He did not lead armies, pass reforms, or issue edicts of note. Yet his name, by sheer coincidence, tied him inseparably to the grand narrative of Rome itself. The grandeur of the empire had been reduced to its final figure, whose very identity seemed a reflection of both its mythical past and its inevitable end. The image of the little Augustus, the last to wear the imperial purple in the West, would forever mark the close of the Roman story in Europe. The fall of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE is often spoken of as the fall of Rome, but such phrasing is misleading. What truly fell was the Western Roman Empire, already fragmented and weakened for decades. In the East, the empire endured, thriving at times and struggling at others, but ultimately surviving for nearly a millennium more. Centered in Constantinople, the city founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE as the New Rome, the Eastern Roman Empire preserved Roman governance, law, and culture long after the West had collapsed. The Eastern emperors, such as Zeno during Romulus' deposition, considered themselves the sole legitimate rulers of the Roman world. The idea of two emperors, one East, one West, had been a practical arrangement, but not a division of the empire's essence. Thus, when Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, it symbolized the reunification of imperial dignity under the East. Zeno accepted Odoacer as ruler of Italy, not as emperor, but as a patrician under his nominal authority. To contemporaries in the East, Rome had not fallen at all, it had simply been consolidated. The Eastern Roman Empire would go on to endure dramatic transformations. It weathered invasions, religious schisms, and internal strife, yet it remained a bastion of Roman tradition. Latin gradually gave way to Greek as the language of government and culture, but the empire still called itself Romania, the land of the Romans. Its citizens regarded themselves as Romans, even as outsiders increasingly labeled them Byzantines, after Byzantium, the old name for Constantinople. For centuries after Romulus Augustulus, the Eastern Empire continued to project power across the Mediterranean. Under Justinian in the 6th century, Roman armies reconquered Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain, briefly restoring the dream of a united empire. Even as new powers rose, the Franks in Gaul, the Arabs in the Near East, the Slavs in the Balkans, the Eastern emperors maintained the Roman legacy. Constantinople, with its massive Theodosian walls and its gleaming Hagia Sophia, stood as the beating heart of a world that still claimed descent from Augustus and Constantine. The empire finally came to an end in 1453, nearly 1,000 years after Romulus Augustulus laid down the purple in Ravenna. When the Ottoman Turks breached the walls of Constantinople, it marked the true end of the Roman state. By then, the name of Romulus Augustulus was long forgotten by most, but the line that connected him to Constantine Exile, the last Byzantine emperor, formed an unbroken chain of rulers stretching from the ancient world into the early modern age. So, what happened to the last Roman emperor? He wasn't assassinated, he didn't die in battle, and he didn't leave behind a legacy of laws or monuments. Instead, Romulus Augustulus slipped quietly into history, a boy emperor who became a private citizen, living out his days in coastal exile while the world around him moved on. Yet his story is powerful because of what it represents. With his fall, the Western Roman Empire was gone, but with his name, Romulus Augustus, it was as if history itself had written a final, poetic ending to the Roman story. Rome had ended the way it began, a circle closed, a civilization's last breath whispered through the life of a forgotten boy. If you found this story of the last Roman emperor fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Empire Remembered, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past. And tell me in the comments, what do you think? Did Rome truly fall with Romulus Augustulus, or did it live on through the Byzantines? I'd love to hear your thoughts.